Are you an entrepreneur? Do you want to start your own company? Do you believe that you have everything you need? You have your plans, you have your operations, you have your supply, you have everything ready. But you want to know if in case what you have is what is needed. And you're looking for something that might add value to your business dreams, which is mentorship. For that, today on the Little Text podcast, I have a very close friend with me, a founder, an entrepreneur, an investor, more importantly, a very influential mentor. I have Arjun Sarode with me, a mentor at the most important startup ecosystem in India. And with me today, he's going to share his journey and his mentorship ideas and the way he looks at entrepreneurship in general. Let's join this conversation with me today with Arjun. Arjun, it's a privilege to have you on the Little X podcast, and thank you so much for taking your time. Before we get into the conversations that we generally do, it would be great if all our audience know more about you. So a quick introduction about you would be great.
Thank you, Raam, for having me here. So my name is Arjun. I have I've been here in Hyderabad for about 6 years now, and my career is actually very diverse. I've been in the industry for about 17 years now. I've worked in information technology services, I've worked in advertising, I've worked in consulting, and more recently for the last few years I've been working in innovation. So at present I am the COO of a startup accelerator that focuses on some of the newer creative emerging technologies such as gaming, animation, etc. I have also been a strong supporter of the startup community since about 7 years now, and I do my bit for the community by mentoring startups. So far, I think I've had the privilege of mentoring about over 100 startups.
Wow!
I also used to be a core organizer of one of the largest business-to-business conclaves of gaming in India that used to happen. That happens every year in Hyderabad.
Right.
I'm associated with that, but not on a very hands-on level. But one of their marquee tracks, which involved getting entrepreneurs to network with each other and to network with investors, publishers, enterprise partners, was started and grown by me. I have. Like I said, I've been here in Hyderabad for about 6 years now. I live here with my wonderful wife, Monica, with my mother. Our entire setup has now moved and established. We're invested in the city. We've got our Aadhaar cards made here. In terms of my education and qualification, I'm by virtue, I'm an engineer. I have a degree in computer science engineering, where I was fortunate to be awarded academic distinction. More later in my career, in my life, I have also done my MBA from the Indian School of Business. My specialization was in finance. I was again fortunate to be in great company of some of the other people who also received the Dean's Medal of Merit with them.
Right.
I've been, I must say that my efforts for evangelizing the startup community, especially on the gaming side, have yielded some good results. I have been recognized on national stages. I've been recognized by the Government of India, by various state governments. Last year I was again fortunate to receive the AVGC 40 Under 40 award.
Right.
So I think that's a summary about me.
So I've seen you through most of these conversations. I've seen phases. The kind of contribution, the kind of talent that is there in this country is phenomenal. Now, coming from the diverse background, it requires a certain amount of dedication to focus on making sure that this is what I want to focus on. This is my purpose, and I'm sure that you have had the opportunity to work with multiple startups, multiple entrepreneurs. So what according to you, we've been having these conversations. So what according to you is the first and basic thing that one should have when looking at startup or looking at starting something? And the definition by itself for startup is different. But what do you think is the first thing at the psychological state of mind one should have when they're getting into the whole point of, let me get into a startup.
I have two specific perspectives on the question. One is my own experience as an entrepreneur, and one is my experience as an observer, as a supporter of the startup community. So I'll give quick answers to both.
Right.
I had in my mind the thought of doing something for my own self. That's how we call it over here in India. Apna khud ka kuch karna hai.
खुद का कुछ करना है.
I've had that thought since about 2015, early 2015.
Right.
And the first time that I took the plunge, the only time that I took the plunge was in late 2018. By the time the company formation and everything was done, it was early 2019.
Right.
It took me about 3 years.
Right.
My personal learning is that the biggest factor that comes into the picture on about this question is the will of and the courage of taking the plunge.
Right. Right.
I was afraid, and I can completely sympathize. I can empathize with everyone who's kind of been on the fence, who in India who wants to do something of their own, who want to start their own thing.
Right.
But they're just afraid.
Right.
A lot of it actually comes because of the systematic barriers that that are there in our country. Our country historically has been a country of job seekers,
Right.
and we have always been, even in my own family, we've always been kind of it has been beaten around the bush that you get a job,
Right.
get a stable job, work in an IT company, get an opportunity to go abroad,
Right.
and you're set for life.
True.
Entrepreneurship, on the other hand, one of the first questions, which was a very naive and funny questions in hindsight now,
Right.
but it really pinched me, was when my GST certificate had come, and I
Right.
I had to put it.
Right.
My mother saw it, and she asked me, "Would you have to return this if you ever have to fold?"
Right.
And that speaks a lot about. I mean, it was very naive, and she meant well, of
Right,
course.
right.
She's my mother at the end of the day, but that speaks about the mindset that
Right.
that systematically is there.
Right.
It's considered to be a high risk proposition.
True.
Now, once you're in, my experience is that it's like it's like throwing a child into a water.
Right. True.
Then you can either learn to swim,
Right.
or somebody will have to rescue you.
Correct.
Or if it's not a child, then you'll probably drown.
Right.
Right. In most cases, people learn to swim.
True.
And so once you've taken the plunge, when you've kind of dropped the option of having a comfort, having psychological safety for a reasonable amount of time, I think that is when you kind of start your journey as a business owner.
Yeah.
From my experience with the startups, I think, and again, a part of what I just said is also generational, because founders these days are, to be frank, are a generation or two behind me.
Right.
People are jumping into entrepreneurship in early 20s.
Right.
I've had founders who have mentored who were not even 20
True.
when they started their own thing. In contrast, I was 35 when I started my business. Right.
Right.
So now people have that courage,
Right.
which is more easily evidenced, more easily observable,
Right.
and people have a drive
Right.
to to make things happen for them.
True.
So I think that's a very encouraging aspect.
Right.
That said, when during the era when I started entrepreneurship, which wasn't too long, it was just about 6-7 years ago, but somebody gave me advice that really hit hard to me, and it was actually a fellow entrepreneur who has made it well for himself.
Right.
And he is now he's managing a company that was built by his grandfather and then taken to the next level.
Absolutely. Right.
And in passing, he said this to me that in India, entrepreneurship is for two people. It is for people like me who don't need a job,
Right.
and B, it is for people perhaps like you who can't get a job.
Right.
Right. Now, if you are in either of those two buckets, you basically have no other option than to succeed and survive.
True.
Right? Because if you are in the first bucket, where you don't need a job, any job, even no matter how well it pays, it will not be attractive enough for you.
Absolutely.
And if you can't get a job, you can't have the idea of psychological safety. What if I get a paycheck month over month over month?
Right.
So I think that's I think that's a learning that more entrepreneurs should get. That you should put yourself in one of those two buckets.
Correct.
And then you're basically clearing out, all the garbage out of your way in becoming successful as an entrepreneur.
True, I completely agree with you, and I actually think it's a very beautiful thing for mom to say, "Isko return karna padega kya?" That's actually a very beautiful thing, because how I see it is, you've put in an effort, you've taken a step, you've achieved it, and this is what the government has recognized you to say that, okay, you're worthy. My son has put in so much of effort to get this. Agar ye return karna padega, to bura lage. She'll feel bad about it, because you earned it and then you are giving it off. The second part of it, the second part of what you've told, which I really resonate well, is with respects to what an employee or an employer mindset is. It's all about why do I have to do it? And gone are the days when we, like you're telling, we are a generation behind, where previously at least our fathers, our grandfathers, especially in the job hai, everything is fine. If there is a job, you're perfectly fine. But the definition of job by itself has changed so much that a job was considered a lifetime security for our fathers and grandfathers and the previous generation. Even for us, we were got into the typical state like engineering karo, life set, inter karo, life set. So that is a trap that we all grew out of. So now the generation change has come in so much. The self-worth by itself has changed drastically, where, like you said, kids or young adults, I would like to call that, young adults who are 19, like one, for example, I have a couple of, I have one 19-year-old who started his own company. He wanted to do something on his own, and was not really there to guide himself well, but he knew his self-worth. So he came up and said, I would want to pick up on this and let me see what I can. And to be very honest, he's the one who's leading this entire podcast right now, and as a resident entrepreneur. And these are opportunities that have come up in the market with the sense of one, validating someone's self-worth, and also making sure that they actually put the 100% effort that they want to do, even for that. The other point that you spoke about was with respect to pani mein phek do, throw the child in water. They'll decide if in case they want to swim, or someone is there to help them out, or if it's an adult, you throw, either they learn or they drown. But I think that's where mentors like you come into play. Even for adults, young adults and adults about 30-35, you've been that guy who actually went into that swamp, picked them up and moved in. How do you think, is that something that is needed in the market even now, or do you think the access to this kind of a support exists well, or is it something that is still perceived as a factor to be considered to start with?
Oh, I think today the systematic support for entrepreneurship in our country is multitudes better, maybe 100 or 1,000 times better than what it was just about 6 or 7 years ago.
Right.
The work that I do at the accelerator is actually that.
Right.
What you do is you basically put in a group of companies, a group of founders together. You make a small community of 15 or 20 of these founders, and you give an opportunity for all of them to learn together and learn from each other.
Right.
Last week we had our program is coming to an end for this cohort, and generally the program ends with a demo day where they have to pitch to real investors.
Right.
And one of the last sessions that we did was pitch review by your fellow peers.
Wow.
So we call it a peer review pitch, right?
Wonderful.
And I think it was one of the most highly rated sessions of our program, because the kind of positive feedback that each founder got from the perspective of someone who either has been in her or his shoes or is expecting to be.
Right.
So it was instead of from a community, it kind of became
Right.
a support group,
Correct.
right? Even because I have also been privileged to get a chance to work closely with governments.
Right.
I have come to realize that the systematic support that various governments are providing, even the central government, the state governments, for entrepreneurship has been phenomenal. There are so many
Right.
schemes,
Right.
there are so many incentives for startups.
Right.
Just about 6 or 7 years ago, when I started, there was nothing.
Right.
And so, first of all, access to mentorship itself was
Right.
very, very hard.
Right.
You had to ask people to mentor.
Right.
Many would not agree because they had other commitments, and even the ones who would agree would often have a sort of a price for that,
Understood, yeah.
which is not wrong. I think if you have significant value to add, you should be charging some. You should be able to monetize it.
Right.
But then, how does the founder distinguish the signal from the noise?
Right.
And I think the way I made my own business as an entrepreneur was essentially solving this problem itself.
True.
That there was just a need for high signal advice.
Right.
Much of it can actually be contrarian. So what
Right.
I always encourage the startups that I work with is take everything that I am advising with a pinch of salt.
Right.
If you consider me as a physician to whom you're going with a problem, always take a second opinion.
Right.
And see if there are significant differences between
Right.
what I am saying and what the other person is saying.
Right.
I think that saves a lot of time. So essentially, the difference between becoming an entrepreneur then and an entrepreneur now
Right.
is that during my years and even the years before that, everyone had to reinvent their own learning curve,
Right.
which because of the accelerators that I work with, or the events that I support, or just the general work that I do for the community, I've come to realize that that entire what it took me about 2 years to learn and
Right.
make a sizable revenue stream.
Right.
That entire timeline has now come to around anywhere between 3 to 6 months for a lot of people.
Wow. Okay.
And because of that, if
I understand.
if you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
start making money in about 4 to 6 months,
Right.
your odds of success increase drastically, because that's that much amount of less capital expenditure that you have to put in your business.
Correct. Correct. And I think I really agree with you on that, and that's pretty much what I've gone through as well. Like when I started working on to build my own company. To be very honest, the whole concept of starting TRD and the ecosystem of TRD started 22 years back. It started as a concept when I was questioned, when I was given a feedback by my reporting manager then. Said, no, it was a simple, naive conversation where I decided to quit my job at that point of time because of different aspects that were there. And I said, listen, I don't think I want to continue working with an organization. I'm your subject matter expertise. Sorry. I don't want to work on the job anymore. I want to go ahead and start my own company. Because I'm your subject matter expert, I don't think the process will survive because of me. And that I would consider as an arrogant statement at that point of time.
Yeah.
But essentially, that is something that was really what opened up my mind towards what I was heading for. So Meenakshi Jaiswal, I would always be grateful and did it for that one statement. She said, "It's great that you want to go ahead and start your own company, but I'll tell you something that might or might not make sense for you. If you believe an organization cannot survive because of an individual, you're wrong.
Yes.
So if you're going and starting your own company, go ahead and build it in such a way that it runs with or without individuals, so that tomorrow, when the time comes, your company should run with or without you."
Yes.
And it blew my mind. I come from a very typical family where जब engineering कर लो, नौकरी कर लो, sorted. I was working on different other aspects, fine. I was into cricket, that was all, everything was appreciated. But पहले job.
Yes.
That's what it was.
Yes.
So it took me by storm. Like, my father comes from a very humble background of business. So I've always seen him wake up in the morning, go to the office, come back at 11, 12, 1 for lunch, finish, have a 1 hour sleep, go back to office, come back at 8 o'clock. That was the routine I grew up in. So if the person's there, it works. Even now, my father tells me the same thing. If you're not sitting in the office, your business is not running.
Yes.
But how is it even possible? So for me, it took all that time. I sat down, understood what is economy, what is business, what are the types of businesses that are available, product, service, what do I want to get into, and my learning curve started there. And for me to implement the learning curve, it took another 6 years, and that's what the legacy is. So that during this entire course, there was no mentoring, there's no someone to look at, and more importantly for me, at least this is what my personal experience is that I didn't know who to ask. I didn't know if I should ask and what to ask. But the fundamental aspect of entrepreneurship, like you said, is pehle ask.
Yes.
पूछने में क्या जाता है?
Yes.
The max you would get is a no.
Absolutely.
That's it. But you will at least have that validation to say, at least I've asked.
Yeah.
Right. So that with what you're doing, Arjun, and the entire system that the government is doing right now is phenomenal. Now you don't have to worry about asking. You are with the social media coming in. You're getting most of the answers. If the answers that you're posting online are relevant to you and they're able to, if someone is able to relate with you, they will come to you.
They will.
And you're creating those channels and funnels, which is phenomenal for any entrepreneur, and the mindset by itself. That actually is what I wanted to understand for the next part of it, which is the economy side of it. The how do I put it? The behavioral economy and the behavioral understanding of how an entrepreneur's mindset has changed quite significantly, and what, according to you, is the best way to look at it, from a mentor's point of view, from an entrepreneur's point of view by yourself, and an investor point of view, because these are the three different caps that you wear in sequence and in array. So can you help me out on that?
Yes, I like I like quoting small anecdotes from my life, because essentially my life has just been a Pandora of experiences, and I've, over a period of time, and most of those experiences have resulted in failures, from tiny failures to massive failures. But what I have gotten out from those experiences are small learnings. So when I was, the story goes that when I had decided that I will do my own business, I was married, and I had just gotten married. Barely, it had been about 6 or 7 months. And that was a big anticlimax for both the families, my family, and because the reason why I would like to think my wife's family agreed to get me married to my wife was because I had a stable job. I was doing well, and then 6 months later I was like, you know what, I'm packing my bags, moving to Hyderabad. I'm going to start my own thing. But thankfully, my family comes from my wife comes from a family of hardcore industrialists, right? What we call in Hindi as Vyaparis, right? They don't necessarily relate with entrepreneurship, but they understand what business is. Dhande, right? So I was very afraid, very intimidated, and my wife had been encouraging me to have a word with her father, who has himself been a very accomplished industrialist. So I had a word with him, and he just, it was barely a 2-minute chat, and he asked me, how much money are you earning right now? And I said, this is the number. And he asked me, would you be comfortable in earning 25,000 rupees for the next 10 years? And it was a curveball question because that number was fraction of what I was earning.
Got it.
But strangely enough, I think, again, it's as a matter of mindset, I was okay with that. And I gave a very instinctive answer, like, sure, I think I'll manage. And he said, then don't worry, then 10 years later you will be successful. The maximum it will take is 10 years. The most important factor as a founder is that you've got to know that time is that variable that can change the same equation's outcome from absolutely negative to exponentially positive. There is this saying among gamers and gamblers is that if you're on the table for long enough, the chips will come to you. And that essentially is the entire evidence of time. So I knew that what I was playing was the long game. My advice to every founder as a mentor is, keep the element of time into your consideration. The longer horizon you have for yourself, the longer your odds of succeeding in your business
Right.
get.
Right.
If you are going to think that my goal is to raise X million dollars of funding in the next 12 months, the odds of that, in my opinion, are happening are reasonably less
Right.
than having a goalpost that I will make a business that will outlive me.
Right.
At the end of 50 years, I would keep the odds of that business
Right.
nearly close to 100%. Nearly
True.
close to.
True. I agree.
When you do that, you're open to all kinds of this business school management techniques that I have also learned,
Right.
pivoting,
Right.
and all these fancy jargons.
Right.
Because what are you doing essentially is you are playing the long game.
Right.
When you play the long game, your objective is not to win the game. Your objective is to stay in the game.
Stay in the game. Yes.
So that is exactly what I did in my business. I
Right.
started with one or two hypotheses.
Right.
They didn't work.
Right.
But they gave me one segue into a third hypothesis.
Right.
And then I tried that, and then I tried the fourth, and then something worked.
Right.
And then the moment I saw something was working, I started replicating it. And I
Right.
started earning more money, and then it gave me more ideas.
Right.
So I have always had this mindset.
Right.
And this is also an advice that I give to my founders.
Right.
When someone comes and says, I only have a runway of 6 months left,
Right.
I need to raise money
Right.
before this runway ends. I tell them that you have a runway of 6 months to extend your runway by another 6 months.
Yes. Yes.
And if you have that mindset,
Yeah.
then it's only a matter of time
Correct.
when you succeed. Now, the definition, whatever is your definition of success, whether
Right.
it is raising in external funding, or whether it is becoming profitable, whether it is becoming a unicorn, whatever you wish. But
Right.
you've got to consider these two factors. One is the element of time, and one is the element of playing the long game,
Correct.
the mindset element.
Correct.
From an investor's perspective, let me just give a disclaimer over here. First of all, I don't invest my own money
Of course.
in startups.
Of course.
But I do as a part of the day job that I have.
Right.
The organization that I work with, they invest some money in startups,
Right.
and I am responsible for the portfolio management of that
Right.
portfolio,
Right.
just like how a typical venture capitalist would
Yeah.
do.
Right.
I also have this very peculiar position where I'm also an investor and I'm also a mentor to the
Correct.
startup. And many times, by design, these two cannot coexist.
Coexist, yes,
So
yes.
I try to tell my startups, even the ones that we invest in, that you consider the organization as your investor and myself as your mentor,
Mentor. Yes.
so that I can give you that high signal advice that
Right.
a mentor should be able to give you. But this is where I want to connect the dots with what you were just saying.
Right.
When you are inviting external investment in your company, it is very, very important that you make your job redundant.
Correct.
You make yourself replaceable,
Absolutely.
because that is the entire reason why an investor
Right.
would come into your company.
Correct.
So when you are opening up your startup for external investment, in the short term, in the medium term, of course, you want to have control. You want to have,
True.
you want to do things your own way, and
Right.
of course, it's your baby. At the end of the day,
Yes.
you have all the reason of feeling a sense of belonging to that.
Right.
But what is the best case scenario?
True.
The best case scenario is that eventually that company goes public, or
Correct.
that company gets acquired by someone,
Right.
where you lose the majority of the ownership. When
Right.
you lose majority of the ownership and you're still clinging on to my thought and my idea, it is not going to go well for you.
True.
My perspective as an investor slightly differs onto that, but still, I insist that now you've got a new entity in your decision making
Correct.
pool,
Right.
in your table. So it's important that you understand what their expectations is.
Correct.
You understand what their incentives are to
Correct.
continue supporting you,
Correct.
and then you deliver on that.
Right.
Which is the entire behavioral economics
Correct.
that
Right.
that gets me very interested.
Right. Right. So it's behavior, economics. These are very contradicting things. But in the science of business, they are very, very similar. Very similar, and it's all about how mindful you are. Like you said, as an investor, you know where you are. As a mentor, you know where you are. As an entrepreneur, you know where you are. So that demarcation has to be there. But the only person who's aware of that is you.
Yes.
As an entrepreneur, for me, it's the same thing. What is my team? What is the system that I want my team to work on? What are the processes that I want them? What are the end objectives that they want? What are the KRAs that they're looking at? Are something that they have to bring into the table rather than the other way around. Now, when we bring into that demarcation, how important is, I think it's a word, if it's not, let's try that to coin as a word, mindfulness of business, like
Yes.
being mindful of your business. How important do you think it is for us?
I think as a promoter or as a founder, one of the most important elements that can sort of keep you ahead of the curve. And again, like I said before, entrepreneurship, one of the definitions of entrepreneurship for me is for being to stay in the game. Right? If you have to stay in the game, you have to stay slightly ahead of the curve.
Right.
You can't remain predictable,
Right.
because the moment you start becoming predictable, someone is going to come and predict what
Right.
your next move is going to be.
Correct.
So you've got to always be on a learning curve.
Right.
Now, as a founder, you're driving a car, right? And you've got a team, you've got stakeholders who have betted on that car to win
Right.
a certain race, right?
Right.
So, and that includes your team, the mechanics, the entire staff that takes care of the vehicle itself.
Right.
But then there are also the investors and other stakeholders who are betting on the car itself.
Things that Jack Ma also
Yeah.
mentioned. You either choose to be a big part in a small engine, or you be a small part in a big engine.
Yes.
So the definition by itself stands with respects to how are you looking at it. Like you said, how are you driving the ecosystem around you? How are you looking at negating it? It gives you a very high level perspective of looking at things, and it's a bird's eye view.
Yes.
And one of the most powerful predators that is there in the world is always a bird.
Yes.
Because it always
Always has the bird.
always prefers to have a higher perspective.
100%.
That's a great amount. Nature by itself is defined that way. So when we are trying to change and blend the conversation to say, okay, this is why I'm being mindful. It's very easy to say that I am mindful of who I am. The definition by itself, I am mindful to a concept that I want to live my life in a particular way, or I want to follow a particular principle which will add value to my time. But what is your core essence? That is something that is non-existent at this. I mean, I would technically say it's non-existent, but something that the next generation of entrepreneurs or the current generation of businessmen have to be there to guide each other.
Absolutely.
And that's when the ecosystem by itself will develop quite aggressively.
Which we actually see happening
Right.
now. I have seen over the last 2-3 years that let me give an example. In my cohort, there's a very wide standard deviation of the experience of the founders.
Right.
On one side, I have someone who's 18 or 19 years old,
Right.
and on the other side, I have someone who has spent 20 years in the industry and is in early 50s right now,
Right.
and starting and starting up, right?
Right.
And the entire spectrum in between. Now, when this entire spectrum comes and interacts with itself, the amount of learning that is generated, the sum of the parts is so much higher
Right.
than the sum of individuals. So me talking
Yeah.
to all those 15 people one-on-one, the amount of impact that it will create is probably fractions of
Right.
me ensuring that they are all talking amongst each other.
Right.
For me, I'll take a small segue. For me,
Right.
my learning of this particular principle
Right.
came when I was studying in ISB,
Right.
and my class was a very similarly diverse cohort.
Right.
We had people who, I was in early 30s.
Right.
We had people who were 26, 27 who had
Right.
already become, chief revenue officers at startups.
Right.
And we had, people who had served 20, 25 years in the Indian Armed Forces,
Wow. Okay.
and then coming and doing an MBA. And the amalgamation of thought.
Right.
So it was not even just like we are talking about a particular problem.
Right.
We are talking about finding the valuation of so and so company.
Right.
It was just the perspective
Right.
that everyone was bringing on the table.
True.
Again, so I learned to be mindful
Right.
in that scenario
Right.
where I stopped thinking about I need to be seen. I need to be acknowledged into
Right,
this.
right.
And I was spending a lot of time just observing people.
Right.
And that kind of, that became a hobby, and
Right.
it has now become a habit.
Right.
So even today when I was driving over here, I was observing how a lot of two-wheeler riders or auto riders are zoned out.
Right.
So they know that they are in your lane.
Correct.
And you're trying to give them a subtle pass
Right.
to let you go, but they're seeing you, but they're just zoned in to that.
Yeah.
It happens with me also, of
Yeah,
course.
of course.
I'm not beyond flaw.
Yeah.
But every time I realize that I'm getting zoned in, I kind of step out of it and start observing myself.
Right.
It has improved my ability of taking decisions tremendously well.
True.
It has made me curious about learning various decisioning
Right.
frameworks.
Right.
And then the experience, once again, due credit to my professors and my school, the fact that my MBA education at ISB was happening in parallel with my struggle in my own business.
Right.
I was actually able to get the most value for money, because every class, every course was a new learning for me that I could come back home and very next day implement in
Right.
the way I was doing my own business.
True.
It had a huge impact on me.
Right. So, being mindful, looking at things from a different perspective. You quoted a lot of anecdotes and quotes from a lot of books. I'm sure that when we're in college, I've seen I've had
Yeah,
friends like you from ISB. So the amount of time you spend inside the library
Yeah.
is massive, and it all goes on a purpose to validate your thoughts and the perspectives that it brings across, to validate your subject with valuation XYZ. But there are certain things that you always read to understand. There are certain things that you read to analyze if in case you are right or wrong, and there are certain things that you read just because you need something to put a narrative out. What are your interests towards reading or learning, and how is it that you look at books in general?
I have come to a point of a very bittersweet relationship
Right.
with books.
Right.
From being very excited, I started reading. It was a self-made habit that I put, I think, in 10th class or 11th class. I was in Bhopal, and I had purchased a subscription of, I purchased a membership of the British Library.
Oh,
It's a massive setup,
Yeah.
and I used to go there every weekend, and just spend about 3 or 4 hours in the library, and then bring a book back home. From there to the point where when I was doing my MBA, during MBA you always have this FOMO of everyone kind of reading so many books, learning about so many mental models, talking about the bestsellers, the subtle art of doing this, the psychology of that. And I started, I read a lot of books, and I realized that I was not enjoying those
Right.
books, even though those books had a lot of value. So I've come to one very hard conclusion for myself. I started forgiving myself for not being able to finish a book.
Right.
It would make me feel so guilty.
Right.
Right. So I gave myself a blanket permission,
Right.
and eventually it kind of evolved to the point where along with the permission for me to drop a book that is not interesting to me, I gave a responsibility to the author.
Right.
That it is your responsibility to keep me, the reader,
Right.
engaged.
Correct.
Over the last 5 years, I've picked up at least 200 books, and out of those 200 books, at least 190 I've dropped off without finishing them.
Okay.
Now, some of those books have been legendary books.
Okay.
Thinking Fast and Slow, for example, by Professor Kahneman, right?
Right.
Personally, a hero to me,
Right.
but he wrote a very textbooky book,
Right.
which I couldn't go through beyond the first or the second chapter because I was
Right.
just not able to get engaged with that book.
Right.
In parallel, I started reading Professor Dan Ariely's work,
Right.
which was also research based,
Right.
but it had very interesting stories.
Right.
And I liked that book much better than the previous book.
Right.
Likewise, I think for me, this realization came when I was learning about, when I was educating myself about strength training.
Right.
And I found out that there was one book called Starting Strength, which is like the Bible for strength training.
Okay. Right.
It's a book that gives you your standard, 5x5 workout routine.
Okay.
And I read 1 or 1.5 chapters of that book. It made all sense, but they were just quoting research, and it was very textbooky. So again, I dropped that, and I felt very demotivated because for me, learning is a very important part before I actually do something.
Right.
It at least goes hand in hand. Then at the gym, I found a very small 45-50 page book which was called Strong Lifts. It was written by, so the first book was written by a researcher.
Right.
The second book telling pretty much the same thing, but it was written by a lifter.
Oh.
Okay. And that book was the most no-nonsense book on strength training that I have ever written. It just started with, 2-3 rules of thumb: work out 3 days a week, say no to your friends on your workout days,
Okay.
and this is how much you should lift, this is how
Right.
you should do,
Right.
these are the exercises that you should do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's it, end of the book. I finished.
With standard template.
That's it.
Copy paste. Yeah.
I have started, for a lack of a better word, evaluating or judging books more on the ability of the author. My perspective on books has changed in a way where I have kind of started to favor more about authors who keep the reader engaged,
Right.
even if the content is not phenomenal,
Right.
versus authors who are not able to keep the readers engaged, even if the content is phenomenal.
Right.
One of my favorite stories is, there's an author, I will not name this author, but is an Indian author whose books have been made into movies.
I think
so on and so forth.
we should name the other. It's pretty much fine. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, you've completed your statement. I will definitely.
Yeah, so there is this persona about this author that
Yeah.
he writes very cheesy books, very
Right.
romanticized, etc.,
Right.
etc. And the people who read those books are again very very cringy.
Right.
People who watch those movies are again.
Right.
It's not the kind of audience that the presumably intellectual crowd likes to associate
Right.
themselves.
Right.
But my experience with his books has been that he writes books that I like reading.
Okay.
When he released his second book, this was in early 2000s. I remember I had a mathematics internal exam next morning at 10 o'clock.
Right.
I walked into the store this evening at 7 o'clock, got this book,
Right.
which was a book about spending a night at a BP or something, and I finished that book at 4 o'clock,
Right.
without studying for my math exam at all.
Right.
Instead of writing equations in the exam, I was thinking about the love story that happened in the book. But it was a
Right.
great book,
Correct.
and today, after almost 17-18 years, I still remember that.
Right.
That is what I think your experiences with books should be. I remember more fondly the stories of books of Agatha Christie,
Right.
John Grisham,
Right.
Stephen King,
Right.
that I read as a teenager today. If versus a book that I was compelled to read maybe about 2 months ago, just because everyone, the entire social media was talking about.
Which book is that?
I don't remember the name of the author.
Right.
There's a book called The 48 Laws of Power.
Okay.
It's a
Right.
very interesting book. But
Right.
the way the format of that book is that it talks about all these 48 laws, and then it goes into stories.
Right.
And while those stories are interesting,
Right.
it's a very predictable format for all 48 chapters.
Right.
There is a law, there is one story in favor of the law, there is one story against the law, and then there is one conclusion. Just because of the fact that it's written in a very predictable manner across
Right.
all 48 chapters.
Okay.
I was able to keep my interest for the first 5 or 6 chapters, maybe
Right.
50 or 60 pages.
Right.
And then I was like, all right, I'll just read the law. And
Right.
I'll just read the interpretation.
Right.
I don't necessarily need to subject myself to all
To
these
the
stories or the
author's
15.
perspective
Yes,
on it.
exactly.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't recollect. It's a good book, which I
Right.
would recommend.
Right.
But in my opinion, a book like 450 from Paddington by Agatha Christie,
Right.
or a book like The Rainmaker by John Grisham,
Right.
or for that matter, even psychological books, philosophical books, my bad.
Okay.
The essays of Jiddu Krishnamurti.
Jiddu Krishnamurti,
What,
yeah.
I mean, you can just feel the amount of awareness that,
Right.
that gentleman had
Right.
in a century before us.
Exactly.
I think those have been some of the reads that I have really liked.
Right.
So
No, I think that's one of the main reasons when I talk to every time I sit and have a chat with you, the conversation is always about how aware you are when it comes to business, when it comes to entrepreneurship, mentorship, these workshops, what the government is doing, how are we doing it, about each and every individual in your cohort. These are things that I keep observing about you. And every time I see is the one thing that I always take away from you is how aware you are about yourself to one, not predict a pattern out of it, but by looking at each of them individually at that moment, not with respect to before or after, but at that particular moment. And those are the moments that actually mentorship is needed. It's not about it's mentorship is not about one blanket statement ki you have a template that you follow. It's all about how the other person is feeling, how is it that you interpret it, and what do you think is the answer he would want to listen, and then precisely place it when he is in the ability to listen to it. From you, that is one of the rarest people I've seen who's able to precisely pin down and give that conclusion, give the answer that they want to hear, but the answer that is needed for them to listen, and that awareness of time, space, and activity, when to do, what to do, is what the beauty of true mentorship always is, and that's how I look at it. And your narrative with respects to how books have actually brought in that narrative, how they've influenced your thought process onto this, has been phenomenal. And how is that something that you derive from your life experiences? Because we spoke about a lot of things. We spoke about your careers, your choices, your preferences, your family, and even with respects to how books and your father-in-law telling you that would you be able to comfortably live through it. All of these answers actually contributed to who you are.
Yes, indeed.
To be very honest.
Indeed.
And I've seen a lot of the conversations with you specifically, where you've highlighted one of your startup founder, and his perspective at particular point of time, and you coming and us discussing about that to see how is it that he's brought in, and those learnings are something that is constant for you.
Yes.
Now your learning pattern, I won't say has a pattern, but you have a pattern, so essentially whatever your learnings are actually adding up to the pattern. Am I correct?
Yes. So it's almost you've kind of hit the nail
Right.
on that. And to be frank, I mean I'm being behaviorally mindful right now to actually acknowledge what you just said, because I hadn't thought of it from this way.
Okay.
But if I had to rephrase that, I think in terms of a mathematical equation, it has kind of become like a cumulative
Right.
equation,
Right.
where I have been doing this for a while. And of course, when I started, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. There was very little subject matter expertise. As a matter of fact, I still don't think I have subject matter expertise. I consider myself as a mediocre person. At best, maybe a delta above mediocre.
Right.
But the experiences that have come to me so far, not just in the last 5 or 6 years as a mentor, but also as an operator in multiple startups, as a student in my MBA program or in my MTech program, all of those have added perspectives. And every time I get an opportunity to kind of draw that experience, along with that, now a particular experience could be from 2014, but on that experience, when I have to implement that learning, I am able to put in my learnings and the conclusions from my experiences all the way since 2023.
Right.
So that kind of becomes better for me.
Right.
That said, there is one thing that in the entire experience, see, everyone gets experiences,
Right.
but there have been a couple of very useful interventions in my life where I got an opportunity to learn something that this regular, like how your vehicle also needs to stop sometime and
Correct.
do its maintenance.
Right.
Right? So For me, one of those interventions was when I was in Bombay working in advertising, and I just returned from a conference.
Right.
And I asked my boss, we had returned from San Francisco, or I think it was Las Vegas, and I asked my boss, how did you think about it? And he said, you're very sincere and everyone acknowledges it, but I think you need to work on your soft skills. I think you need to work on your dressing sense. You need to work on your table manners.
Right.
And I would recommend that you go and actually take some professional training for this.
Okay.
So I did that. And then I realized that now that it has been 10 years since that particular incident, how much impact that had.
Right.
When I started my own business, I had the same feeling that you were telling me.
Right.
I didn't have access to mentors. I didn't
Right.
have access to people who knew
Right.
who were experts in something, right?
Right.
And it was at that time when my wife came and gave me this idea that why don't you do an MBA?
Right.
You have time.
Right.
You are qualified. You are experienced.
Right.
I think I would place a good bet that you might get selected.
Right.
Why don't you apply? And India's best business school is about 3 kilometers away. Why don't you do that?
True.
And these interventions actually helped me a lot.
Correct.
So if I have to summarize the learnings of those interventions, first is you have to be empathetic towards situations.
Right.
You have to understand that people often don't mean, especially in India, in Indian and a lot of Asian contexts, which are very high context. Our languages themselves are very high context, right?
Yeah.
You've got to understand that when someone says that you are really shining in this interview, that does not necessarily mean that it's a praise. That probably means that someone was not very happy that you were outshining them.
Right.
Okay, so you've got to understand that intent behind what is being said.
Right.
Second thing is the ability to ask smart questions. And I think that's something that I continuously strive to get better at.
Right.
But I have seen a very clear correlation between the founders who ask me questions like, how should I plan this strategy, or what would be the long-term impact of this strategy over the course of 5 years, versus a founder who comes and tells me, can you introduce me to 3 investors?
Right.
The odds of the former
Right.
are incredibly higher, and there's a correlation, there's
Right.
a direct correlation. Some of our best performing portfolio companies have never come and said,
I need
we need funding.
Funding, yeah.
Everyone needs funding.
Everyone needs, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Asking the right questions will give you access to the right resources.
Right.
Third thing is, again, as a part of being behaviorally mindful, I'm aware of what my constraints are.
Yeah.
So I am infamous in the community that I work with for saying, "Bhai, mere ko nahi aata."
Right.
I can connect you. So a friend of mine who came a few days ago asking me, I need to help. I need so and so help with designing this prototype for me. I said, "Bhai, mere ko nahi aata.
Right.
I'm going to send you to Raam.
Right.
Could you please talk to him about that?"
Right.
So I think that's been my learning.
I mean, I couldn't thank you enough for putting it the way it is. But Arjun, firstly, I mean, thank you so much for taking your
I
time.
had so much fun.
It was a delight to always sit and talk to you. But our circumstances of sitting and having conversations were different. But this is more for me, because I am on this focus line where a lot of people talk about entrepreneurship, startups, business karenge, ye karenge. But it's not just about the head of the business or the founder or the CEO being aware of what entrepreneurship is. But the fact of the matter is that everyone choosing to be a part of a business, may it be an MNC, may it be a startup or a legacy business, everyone in this particular day and age has a preference and has a choice. And if you're able to enable that choice, at that entrepreneurship is not just at the head of the business, but it's every aspect of business. That changes the way this country and the world's economic by itself will grow. And we wanted the Little Text to be that platform where we put those small stories together, connect them together, and at the end of the day, the whole purpose of the Little Text is the bigger picture in the smaller text possible. So we want to show that the big picture, and you have the biggest of heart to accept that and be here with me today. Thank you so
I'm
much,
so
Arjun.
no no Ram, I'm actually so glad, and I want to actually say that I admire you and your team, especially Shashank, your grit of. I had a lot of apprehensions about doing this because this is not the kind of platform that I get invited to very
Right.
frequently, and more so, I feel a little, again, mindful about my own ability to give out something valuable,
Right.
meaningful. So
Right.
I know that probably the content that I have spoken today might not be outstanding content, but I do hope that, and thanks a lot to you for joining me
Right.
into hopefully making this an entertaining and an engaging session for your audience.
It has been, Arjun. So if I look back and go back from this conversation, I'm sure that you and I will hold on to those very small experiences both of us share individually in our lives and collective with the way we connect things together. And no better platform I can see at this point of time than the Little X for me at this point of time. And like you said, all credits to the grit of Shashank, my resident entrepreneur, who essentially will be leading this show from here on.
Absolutely.
So,
Wonderful. And
thank
yes,
you so much.
You've got a great team. Ram, thank you so much for everything.